For 10,000 years, the fortress world of Cadia has stood firm against the powers of chaos. Time after time, its brave defenders had fought resolutely against the Warmaster's terrible Black Crusades. Now, however, after millennia of struggle, the end seemed nigh. Over the course of his many invasions, the Warmaster had secretly destroyed the many Necron pylons dotting Segmentum Obscurus. One by one they had fallen to the power of chaos, their destruction lost amid the carnage. The final hurdle in the Despoiler's grand plan were the ones upon Cadia. With the destruction of these final pylons, the Eye of Terror would expand, and a new era of chaos would dawn upon the galaxy. Standing against the culmination of Abaddon's Crimson Path was General Ursarkar E. Creed, and what remained of his once proud army. Every branch and section of humanity's vast armies had gathered upon the fortress world to stem the tide. The most decisive conflict since the terrible days of the Horus Heresy was about to reach its inevitable end. If the grim darkness is getting too much, switch to a tale in the noble brightness of our sponsor today, Last Ark Tactics Analog. This is a new tabletop RPG that hybridizes the classic D&D style with strategy JRPGs like Final Fantasy Tactics. It's all the adventure, character building and action of tabletop gaming with the aeons, airships and anime of JRPGs. Needless to say, it's all stunningly beautiful, and the gamebook is a work of art unto itself. It's got a particularly deep character system, with 15 races, 6 base classes, growing into 18 advanced classes through a customizable job system that effectively leads to infinite possible multi-class combinations, and you'll be adventuring in a fully fledged world, developed over many years. Last Ark Tactics Analog is in the almost done state of development, having been thoroughly fleshed out and tested, and is now seeking backers for its full publication. We'll have the link to their GameFound page in the description, where you can pledge to bring this project over the finish line, and of course you'll get the game book in either physical or digital form, various other goodies, further books and expansions, and if you follow the project before April 21st, you get a free set of dice, so act quick on that one. Check out Last Ark Tactics Analog and learn more with our link below. Blessed Cadia, bulwark of the Imperium, was burning. The Black Legion's opening invasion had almost brought the once impregnable planet to its knees. Thanks to the brilliant leadership of General Creed and Admiral Quarren, disaster had been averted. Now, however, the Warmaster himself would test their mettle. High above the planet's orbit, what remained of Quarren's fleet stood watch. They could not hope to resist another incursion. Their duty was to die trying to give advance warning to their homeworld. An exhausted Quarren watched in disbelief as Abaddon's fleet translated from the warp. The experienced captain, a hero of 100 engagements, could scarcely understand the scale of what he was seeing. All he knew was that the fleet arrayed against him was surely the largest the galaxy had seen since the Great Heresy. The Admiral's worst fears were confirmed when Abaddon's Blackstone fortress, the Will of Eternity, entered the fray. With a heavy heart, Quarren sent the agreed-upon signal back to Creed, Shatter Black, indicating the gravest of threats. Moments later, the Admiral's flagship was atomized by the colossal space station. The rest of his ragged flotilla, counting 2 million brave Voidsmen, charged the enemy. Their sacrifice bought their beloved world 77 minutes. Creed would need far more, however, to organize his forces. Desperate to coalesce his strength around Kasr, he would discover his allies were unwilling to obey him. The Sisters of Battle refused to abandon their shrines, the Dark Angels refused to garrison the Kasr, and the Space Wolves opted for their own strategies. Only the Black Templars and remnants of the shattered Astartes forces seemed willing to stand with Creed and his guardsmen. It was also decided that Sven Bloodhowl of the Space Wolves would lead a forlorn boarding action against the Will of Eternity and destroy it from within. This gambit was inspired by the destruction of St. Gesmain's Hope earlier in the war. Creed was doubtful, but he could do little to curb the Fenrisians' enthusiasm. Predictably, Bloodhowl's strike force was defeated. Abaddon turned the tables and boarded their vessel personally, cutting down all in his path. Soon Sven's men were all presumed dead. Creed's final hope of stopping the world-ending spacecraft had been dashed. As the Will of Eternity approached Cadia, its tech priests worked frantically. Ever since the Gothic War, the Imperium had taken measures to defend the planet against such an attack. The world sported a unique null array, supposedly capable of shielding it against a Blackstone fortress. It harnessed the half-understood power of the many pylons dotting the world, though only in the most primitive sense. Alas, the array had been severely damaged in the previous engagements and seemed inoperable. All seemed lost when the Will of Eternity fired upon the unprepared world. To everyone's shock, however, the null array miraculously worked and deflected the shot. As the defenders thanked the Emperor, the Mechanicus Magi looked at their array in stunned horror. Many of their number lay dead around it, and the blessed machine had been defiled by unknown Xenos technology. Whoever had taken the liberty of improving it had doubtlessly saved the planet for now. Seated on his command throne aboard the fortress, Abaddon took measure of the situation. As long as the null array existed, Cadia would not fall without a proper planetary invasion, and after all of those millennia, he was more than willing to oblige. The War Master's attack was nothing short of apocalyptic. Soon, every remaining bastion was under attack. Creed and his Cadians were holding the bulk of Kasr. The Black Templars, under Marshal Marius Almeric, were manning the Martyrs' Rampart on the fortress's southern sector. The Adepta Sororitas, led by the twins Eleanor and Genevieve, defended the Shrine of St. Maurican, located outside the stronghold. Baroness Vardis led her knights against Legio Vulcanum far to the northeast, delaying them for days. To the north of the Kasr stood the downed Dark Angel's strike cruiser Sword of Defiance. Master Corihil had turned it into a fortress, and his Dark Angels were downing landers and repelling every assault. Their actions would earn them the reluctant praise of the War Master, who lamented the Sons of the Lion never died easily. Wolf Lord Hyfel fortified the ruins of Kasr Jark, between Kraf and the Sword of Defiance. From there, he launched sallies and struck at any weakness he found as elements from the Iron Warriors landed near him. Before long, they would claim the life of Warpsmith Crom Gat, one of Abaddon's chosen. Scenes like this played out across the surface. Yet Abaddon offered the main show of destroying Kraf's null array to Akanthos, Lord Ravager and Master of the Fleet. A vicious follower of Khorne, he would play a key role in the Battle of Cadia. His attack on the orbital platforms drew the eye of his demanding god. Before long, the ancient Space Marine, a veteran of the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, had commenced his ascension. Making landfall, he went against the War Master's instructions and chose to first focus on the Shrine of St. Maurican. He was met by an army of arco-flagellants, penitent engines, and the Sisters leading them. Though Akanthos' decision would cost the Black Legion dearly, he knew their sanctified blood would complete his transformation into a mighty demon prince. As befitted their zeal, the Sororitas sold their lives dearly, dealing grievous losses to the enemy. The otherwise strategically insignificant shrine became a meat grinder. At the climax of the fight, Genevieve and Eleanor, armored in a paragon warsuit, fought the demon prince and withdrew with their lives. The shrine, however, fell to the heretics. It was clear the Imperials would not last as long as they fought parallel to each other. General Creed, mindful of theatrics, delivered the most famous speech of his career. He urged his allies to fight as a unified fist. Thanks to his powerful oration and some well-placed private threats, he managed to convince most loyalist elements to converge on his location. Despite losses, the plan worked. Creed finally had a mostly unified host. It was a testament to how desperate things had gotten that even the Wolves and the Dark Angels set aside their differences. Akanthos pressed on to Kasr, his ascension now complete. Much of his host had been tattered to pieces. The Iron Warriors had suffered grievous losses against the Wolves. His demon engines had been ravaged by the Sisters, and his own Hounds of Abaddon had been decimated by the Dark Angels. And yet, it mattered not. They had served their purpose and brought their master far enough. Disdaining the use of any cauterizing weapon that would not draw blood, Akanthos launched his attack. There was little strategy behind it, only an inhuman drive to kill, maim, and burn. Soon the walls had been breached. The Cadians fixed their bayonets and fought room by room. Their knowledge of the Kasr and its labyrinthine layout played to their advantage. The Cregan Gates soon became one of the most hotly contested spots. the 33rd Cadian was holding it under the inspirational leadership of Colonel Deschain. However, they swiftly broke and routed after witnessing the brutal torture and dismemberment of their beloved leader. Soon the heretics were pouring into the gates, hundreds of thousands strong. As traitor marines opened the gigantic doors to let the horde through, Creed sprung his trap. From the bowels of the planet came 3 reserve units, hidden for just such an occasion. A unit of Kasrkin pinned down the approaching throng, while pre-sighted batteries, tanks and Valkyries tore the enemy to pieces. It would not be enough to stop them, but every second bought was to Creed's advantage. Ocanthos, meanwhile, was abandoning what remained of his humanity. Losing himself in the bloodletting, he claimed the life of Mortlead, the Emperor's champion of the Black Templars. Each step brought him closer to the Null Array. For the second time during the Battle of Cadia, he was met by the twin canonesses. Eschewing their ravaged paragon armor, Eleanor and Genevieve challenged the Demon Prince in an aerial duel. Using their jump packs to get to grips with the traitor, the twins gave their lives in service to their emperor. Ocanthos crushed the life out of Genevieve in front of her sister and broke Eleanor into the dirt with a single powerful blow. Before she died, however, Sister Eleanor drove her sanctified blade deep into the Demon Prince, scoring the greatest wound he had suffered thus far. Shortly after the death of the Canonesses, Ocanthor slew his way into the Null Array. Whatever traps and troops the Mechanicus had prepared were not enough. Soon the array was destroyed, lowering Cadia's shields to the will of eternity. Imperial morale was at its lowest. What was left of Battlefleet Cadia attempted to mount an attack against the Blackstone Fortress, but their action was doomed to fail. As the Null Array burned, Ocanthor flew in the air in triumph, declaring the fall of Cadia. Yet at the height of his glory, something happened that the demon did not expect. From the trophy rack on his back, the severed heads of slain sisters began to sing. The demon picked one up, burning his hand as angelic light emanated from its lifeless eyes. Over and again, the fallen sisters sang the same words in chorus, driving fear into the hearts of the Neverborn. She is coming. As General Creed was attempting to salvage an unwinnable situation, a long-awaited miracle came to aid the Emperor's faithful. Down from the heavens, an angelic figure clad in gold armor descended onto Cadia. Her great wings carried her with ease, and even from afar, Creed could see calm, fierce, and inevitable judgment in her features. Saint Celestine had arrived. For the first time in months, Creed smiled. As the few surviving sisters shouted in ecstasy at the miracle, the general saw with relief that the saint had not come alone. Dozens of landing craft, guided through the warp by the light of the saint, made planetfall. This was Creed's preferred form of miracle. As the transports opened their doors, fresh regiments of sororitas entered the fray and fell upon the foe with fire and prayer. Having borne witness to an imperial saint in all her wrath, the Cadian defenders took heart and resumed combat with redoubled zeal. This was their chance to turn the tables on the heretics. Carving a path through a sea of demons, fleeing in panic before her light, Celestine stood in front of Ocanthor, challenging the demon. Though the former Astartes fought with all the ferocity of the blood god, he was no match for the living saint. In a few short moments, Celestine had outmaneuvered the beast. The fight ended when she pierced the demon's heart with Eleanor's lodged sword. As Ocanthor turned to glare at his killer, he saw the radiant forms of sisters Eleanor and Genevieve resurrected next to the imperial saint. Looking up at the sky, he saw the will of eternity preparing to annihilate the planet, with him still on it. The demon's final thoughts, before the 3 sororitas cut him to pieces, was that Abaddon had tricked and betrayed him. With Ocanthor's death, the ground war was largely won. Abaddon's mortal forces were leaderless, while his demons were in disarray because of Celestine. Slowly but surely, the Imperials were wiping the battlefield clean, reclaiming key positions. And yet the Warmaster cared little. The battle was won. Now that his pawn had destroyed the Null Array, he was free to destroy the planet in one shot. As Battlefleet Cadia pitifully attempted to prevent its advance, the Will of Eternity took up position above the planet. Before it could open fire, however, a second arrival upset the Warmaster's plans. The Phalanx, fortress monastery of the Imperial Fists, and greatest of the Imperium's vessels, finally arrived. After his brutal fight with Shontu and Belakor, Captain Tor Garadin had made all haste to reinforce Cadia. The gargantuan fortress was beaten, battered and undermanned, but it still posed a monumental threat to anything Chaos had to offer. Taking the lead of Battlefleet Cadia's attack, it plunged straight into the archenemy's armada, squarely focused on the Will of Eternity. The surviving Imperial ships fell in line, their suicidal engagement having suddenly turned into a winnable scenario. The void battle that ensued was a slugging match the likes of which has seldom been seen. No subtlety or cunning tactics were used by either side. This was a fight where armor, firepower, and sheer stubbornness prevailed. As the phalanx cut a swathe through the War Master's fleet, it seemed like nothing could stand in its way. Before long, the fortress monastery had finally reached the Talisman of Vol. The two ancient spacefaring behemoths, relics of eras long forgotten, opened fire against each other. No living Imperial could recall such a titanic duel. Every salvo from either monster was enough to level cities. Yet against one another, they seemed evenly matched. Moreover, the Will of Eternity was relatively intact, whereas the Phalanx had already suffered significant damage. If their battle of attrition continued unopposed, it seemed likely the Phalanx would fail. Abaddon still had a chance to finally be rid of planet Cadia. Bad news, however, came in threes. After the unexpected arrival of a living saint and a relic vessel of the Dark Age of technology, it was a humble contingent of Astartes that would turn the tide. Abaddon was soon informed that a handful of space wolves had made their way aboard the Will of Eternity. Sven Bloodhowl and a few of his brothers had survived the slaughter of their contingent, and were now attempting to sabotage the Blackstone Fortress from within. They could not destroy the vessel, but they could cripple its shields to give the Phalanx a fighting chance. Aware of the danger, Abaddon teleported to deal with the threat personally. As his battle brothers rigged explosives across key sections, Sven knew he had to distract Abaddon long enough for them to do their work. Hurling himself at his target, the Wolf Lord was thrown aside with contemptive ease. As the despoiler carried on his way, Sven dragged himself up and threw his gauntlet at him, laughing in derision at the War Master's face. The Wolf Lord laughed and laughed with all the considerable scorn a Fenrisian could muster. As a second gauntlet flew at him, Ezekiel swatted it aside with Draknien. Abaddon, chosen of the gods, flew into a rage, baited into an unwise attack by Bloodhowl's taunts. Disarmed and gloveless, the Wolf Lord engaged his foe with his bare hands. He was still laughing as Abaddon killed him, landing several blows against the son of Horus. As Bloodhowl's dying mirth echoed across the hall, a massive explosion rocked the Will of Eternity. The Space Wolves had succeeded. The shields were down. Taking immediate advantage of the situation, Tor Garadin directed the apocalyptic firepower of the Phalanx at the newly created weak point. As Abaddon seethed over Bloodhowl's smiling corpse, his mighty vessel came undone around him, shattered by the Phalanx's guns. Only a timely teleportation saved the War Master from sharing his station's fate. After this disastrous loss, the forces of Chaos had to issue a withdrawal. The Imperials had seemingly snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, and secured both the surface and the orbit above Cadia. Cries of unfathomable joy echoed throughout the planet. On the surface, thousands of supplicants threw themselves at the feet of Saint Celestine, while every ship in orbit voxed their thanks at the Imperial fists aboard the Phalanx. If, however, the Loyalists believed the battle to have been over, they were about to be disappointed. Abaddon's fury was incandescent. After 10,000 years of patience, planning and preparation, Cadia still stood. His pride as a warrior, an Astartes, and a War Master could not simply allow this to be. He had come too far, and sacrificed too much to let the corpse worshippers deny him now. He would not allow a setback, however grave, to stand in the way of his triumph. He would not fail as his weakling father had, soulless, honourless, weeping, ashamed. No matter what the Carrion Lord and his lackeys threw at him, he would prevail. He would crush their armies, ravage their worlds, despoil their temples, topple their golden throne. No matter the cost, no matter the pain, Cadia would fall. We will continue to cover Cadia's darkest hour as this series proceeds. In the meantime, we're planning on covering many other fantasy and sci-fi stories, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.